let's start with like some background on each of the two of you. Just kind of like explain like how you got into crypto and like why you chose Solana of all things.
Yeah, for sure. So Mac and I, both of our backgrounds are in finance and tech. I started at Goldman. Mac started at Morgan. So we were both in like high finance, right? Saw like the massive machine that was moving and swallowing a lot of talent, a lot of operations. Saw a lot of opportunities to improve. Obviously, moved to tech, right? Both of us at this point, serial entrepreneurs. We've worked across like a number of like tech verticals. I think crypto, for me, the story really starts like 2017. I had like played around with crypto before. I hadn't really read any technical documentation. I was in San Francisco. I'm working at Uber. I had just come off of like my finance stint, right? I had started in tech, and I was really interested in like non-financial technology. Like I was just kind of burned out on finance, wanted to like move away from it, and got like reintroduced to Bitcoin. Had known about it as a concept, but was introduced for the first time in like a technical perspective. Ended up like I remember the day I came home, started reading about it. One of my coworkers was like, "You should check it out. You should like really kind of get into it." And like 4 hours later, I'm like curled up. I was living in a 325 square foot studio at the time, like absolutely broke. Moved to San Francisco with like no money, trying to break into an industry. And I'm curled up on my futon because we used to sleep on this futon because you could like fold it up, have a little more space in the apartment, right? And it's been like 4 hours. I haven't had any water. I haven't eaten it. And I'm just deep in technical architecture. Um, I think that the first thing that really stood out to me was just like the intellectual stimulation, right? Like this is very cool technology. And coming with like an engineering background, like just captured me. What would end up, being 6 years now really turned into evaluating first the like conceptual opportunities for that technology to improve the world around us, and then like an understanding that the tech industry as a whole was evolving in this direction, right? So by the time we got to 2021, when margin really started coming together in concept, I was selling the last company that I worked on, which was a logistics software company. I'll let Mac tell his backstory, but Mac was selling a company at around the same time. We both saw a similar opportunity in DeFi and identified Solana as the right infrastructure and the right ecosystem to build in. Found each other through a mutual friend, and never looked back.
Yeah.
Sweet.
Yeah, no, I mean, uh, yeah, it's sort of similar. With Bitcoin in particular, I feel like a lot of people say this, but it's very true with me. I was tracking Bitcoin since like the very start. Um, Bitcoin is actually like one of the I remember like looking at early Bitcoin, wanting to buy two of them, and I was like a young kid. Basically, I was not able to make investment decisions at this point. That was the only investment my parents actually initially refused from me. Wanted to buy it was at like around like $180 at that time for Bitcoin. I wanted to buy
You
two
can
because I had
imagine
like,
Max like 11 years old,
yeah,
right?
no,
And he's
really,
like,
actually.
and Apple and Tesla and
Yeah,
They're
Bitcoin.
like,
And his
go
mom's like,
away.
what?
That's not real.
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
had similar thoughts
They're
growing up,
like,
except I
this is
was like
all this is
rocking
your whole
a
bank account.
Bitcoin miner on a laptop back in the day when you could still do that. And like I
Okay,
mined a couple and,
yeah,
lost that laptop. So I hate myself for it.
yeah,
Hell yeah.
yeah. But funny enough, like soon after, I started like managing a fund individually, and so I had kind of full. I did that for 3-4 years, so I was able to invest in whatever I wanted, and that was great. That taught me a lot. And we made LPs money, and then yeah, I went up to school in Boston, uh, helped out Morgan Stanley with institutional consulting initiative, helped out a private equity firm with some of the companies they were working with, and then started a health tech company We quickly grew that to 20 countries, and kind of interfaced with every sort of wearable app device you used across mindfulness, fitness, nutrition, and aggregated it to one place and allowed you to like seamlessly connect with anyone else. So kind of like removed all the blockers. It's essentially like, funny enough, it's like a so we our original product was this prime brokerage model for DeFi, where there's a bunch of different dexes that do a bunch of different things, and it's really hard to move across them. This was like the same thing, but for instead of different dexes, it was like an Apple Watch and a Garmin and like your Peloton and actually riding a bike. Uh, and then yeah, I started the sales process for that um, about a year after we started it, and then selling a company is like magnitudes harder than starting a company. So that was like a long extended talk, lots of back and forth, and then that finally closed. And then yeah, that was around the time during the sales process was around the time Edgar and I met up in Miami, uh, and then yeah, that kicked off marginfi.
Awesome. I'd love to hear more about like that point, right? Like what was the vision you both shared? And also, I mean, maybe as like a follow-on question to that, you mentioned that you sort of specifically chose Solana as like that, that's the right ecosystem, it has the right infrastructure for what we want to build. I'd love to hear more about the why there as well.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I think we'll start at the beginning, but it's interesting to have been deeply integrated in this space for a couple of years, right? And to see the challenges that like crypto, DeFi, and Solana have had going forward. Definitely want to talk about that. Um, yeah, yeah. What was like the beginning? So, from my perspective, like I'm like selling this other company. I know I want to get into crypto. Just given my background, I am pretty sure I want to be like working in DeFi, right? I'd like spend some time with like NFTs. This was like like a little bit before Candy Machine, like V1 was coming out, right? There was like this like
Early
wild
days.
concept kind of brewing in the rumors, yeah. Close friend of mine, Barrett, who is the founder of Cypher, a perps protocol on Solana. He had already been building Cypher, so he was like timeline wise like a little bit ahead of me. We're old friends, right? We had kind of been close in industry, throughout our entire adult lives. Met each other in college way back when. He goes, "Hey, like these ideas that you have around like crypto and DeFi, you should really check out Solana. Like it's really kind of blowing up." So I'd gotten in, I played a little around with NFTs, played a little around with DeFi. I said, okay, DeFi makes sense. From there, it became like an observational exercise, right? Looking at, okay, what is going on in the space in particular? What are the problems that are relevant to solve like right now, right? Um, Funny enough, like Mac mentioned, his last company was focused on integration. Both Mac and I's background is like centered around this like obsession with integration, because integration is a concept. I mean, it's applicable in lots of places, right? And you deal with kind of the same high level concepts. There's some benefit to bringing things together, and there's some risk, right? And you need to manage the risk to get the benefit. And so, I'm seeing all of these dexes popping up, right? Derivatives in particular in DeFi absolutely blowing up. I'm starting to think about capital efficiency solutions. I hit up a guy named Ami, who's based in New York, super connector, absolutely somebody you need to know in the industry if you don't, right? He probably knows you, even if you don't know him. And I tell Ami, I go, I want to talk to the smartest person you know that can't stop talking about DeFi, because I'm looking to start something with someone, and like, who you got, right? We were going down to Miami. I don't even remember the conference. Maybe you do, Mac.
Bitcoin Miami or something like, or no, it was Art Basel.
It was Art Basel. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, because it was like a little bit later in the year. Yeah. And Ami goes, "Hey, you should meet this guy, Mac, right?" And yeah, we met up. I remember walking into the apartment. There was this golden glow, falling down on Mac from the Miami sun. And, he's in his glasses. He looks up at me just like full of vision and opportunity. And I said, this is the guy, it was love at first sight. So
That's just a revelatory moment.
yeah. No, I mean, I think, and I'll let you jump in here, Mac, but I think really what aligned us, what like locked us in, right, as we talked that week, is the same thing that we talk to like new hires about now. The way we think about like building a team, right? There's really like the two most important things for alignment are, one, like you're interested in the problems that are in front of you to solve, right? They're hard and fun, and that excites you. And then two, from an organizational perspective, there's cultural alignment. You like the way that we do things, right? We think about doing things in the same ways. And we have some pretty strong cultural pillars that we've built our organization around. Mac and I like really aligned on both of those things, and I think aligned on how important both of those things were for us. And that was really a stronger bond than anything else, right? Because like the specific problem, the specific ideas, like people always talk about ideas with startups, right? I think ideas are they're third. They're definitely not the most important, because ideas will change, problems will change, especially in an industry like this. There's so much uncertainty, right? We found it really important to like find people that see the world similarly, that want to affect the world similarly, and starting there, and then you have this natural alignment around like the problems you think are valuable, the solutions you want to implement.
Nice. So, so you guys got talking, and it sounds like the prime brokerage piece you were talking about before, that was kind of the first product, if you will, that or
Yep.
service that you provided, was that. And now, is that something you still do, or is margin lend kind of where you're at now?
Yeah.
The primary focus today.
Yeah. So the prime brokerage model, that still is that no one else has ever successfully incorporated universal margin across perpetuals across different dexes in crypto. So that was a first when it came out. That was a huge win. Like for the first time ever, traders had unified liquidity, unified risk, and a unified trading interface when they were moving across a variety of different dexes. Um, and that was enabled by having a variety of different dexes that traders wanted to trade across with proper liquidity. So, like a good example is like we didn't even have an interface. Traders were plugging in algorithmically. It was a more sophisticated trader class. They were arbitraging like perps between Drift and Mango, for example, and then perhaps like also hedging on Binance or Bybit, etc. And we would recognize those positions on Drift and Mango so that they could collateralize them and borrow against them instead of like from isolated places where the liquidity is fragmented across a variety of different dexes. So really, when it comes to derivatives and this under collateralized lending pursuit for teams on chain, really across like Ethereum, Polkadot, Cosmos, whatever, we kind of pioneered that, and we're pretty proud about that. After the FTX implosion, a lot of these dexes paused, went offline, liquidity shrunk really quickly, and so the traders using our product, like there was no longer the capacity to perform the same strategies across the dexes we connected. And so when that happened, we're like, okay, it's going to take a while for these dexes to pick back up, liquidity, volume, etc. It's not going to be overnight, but as a team, we always push product velocity. We want to move fast, and this actually just like presented us an opportunity to say, okay, at the heart of this prime brokerage model is a borrow lend. Right now, we're just supporting USDC. We could expand the assets we're supporting. So now we can support Solana, USDT, like LSDs on Solana, etc. And we can also deepen liquidity around them. And in the meantime, Solana needs a borrow lend, so we can be this over collateralized borrow lend piece, that this like bottom layer of liquidity for Solana DeFi. And that's like quickly what we did. Like this year, we became in many ways the default borrow lend on Solana. We're the most liquid place for a variety of assets. We've been consistently the fastest growing DeFi app on Solana from a TVL perspective. really high, daily active users, really great borrows, really great rates, really good experience altogether. And we're putting that foundation in place so that as Drift picks up more volume, and as like Cipher picks up more volume, as Zeta V2 like comes out, will be that center liquidity point where traders can then come in through marginfi and trade across the venues that they want to access and have this under collateralized universal margin experience again.
Got it. So less of building out margin lend the way that it exists today, which it sounds like is not actually, hey, we created something that we didn't already have. It was, let's open up something that we already had to create for the prime brokerage model we have. Let's open that up a little bit. Let's make it a little bit more user friendly for sort of all degens, as opposed to just like these very high sophisticated trader types. Is that kind of track?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
And then it sounds like that was less of we're pivoting away from something, and more of this is on pause just because of the nature of the ecosystem and right now, and so we know we want to build out this thing anyway. Let's focus on this in the interim, and then we plan to bring it all together down the road.
Yep. Yeah. I think just one quick point with that is when you're building products that are dominated by finance, like we're building financial primitives essentially, you need to be very sensitive to the stage we're at in the market cycle. And so that's just something we're sensitive to. We're at a stage in the market cycle where those sophisticated traders that were running sophisticated strategies across derivatives on chain aren't really active on chain right now because the liquidity isn't there to support them. The users active on chain right now are smaller, like what we just consider retail participants, like people like you and me that want to borrow to pursue this like NFT trading opportunity, for example. And so we're catering to that archetype in the meantime. When those sophisticated traders come back, we'll be ready for it. But you can't just throw your like dart at a wall when you have a product dominated by finance and say this is our target user and we're only going to build for them, when interest rates are different, when macro conditions are different, when we're in a bull market, we're in a bear market, etc. That's just like a fundamentally broken way of like going about product creation when it relies on like this financial backbone.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. I want to cycle back to one of the things you mentioned. You mentioned this concept of over collateralization and under collateralization, depending on which product that you guys at Margin are interfacing with, or if it's one of your own products. Can you explain for the audience of like what the difference is of being over collateralized or under collateralized for, especially for like the lending sphere, and like why is that good or bad depending on which circumstance you're involved in?
Yeah, for sure. So yeah. I mean, I think I like to come back to the basics here, right? Why does lending matter, right? Why do people care about lending in finance? Lending makes you stronger, right? You come to the market with $100, right? It's what you've got in your pocket. If you can borrow some more money, you have more money to do things, right? Now, that's good. That's the good side, right? The bad side, or the risk, right, is that you borrowed that money. That's not your money. So you need to pay that money back. And that simple concept, like it sounds so simple, right? You're just like borrowing some money from somebody, you're paying somebody back. Someone else is lending you that money, they're getting paid back. That underpins like all of finance and really all of modern society, right? There are 1,000 use cases we can talk about, right? The difference between over collateralization and under collateralization, simplified, is really focused on the problem of figuring out how much capital is safe to lend, right? So, because I mean, if you think about, you're going to the market again, you're borrowing some money, right? If you can't pay it back, if you lose that money, right? What happens, right? What happens to you? What happens to
that lender,
whoever lent you that money, right? Yeah, right. And lenders, they're the ones taking on what's called credit risk, right? But very simply, it's just like, it's your friend being like, "Hey, let me borrow a few bucks," and you being like, "All right, man, like, are you gonna pay me back?" And they're like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, don't worry about it," right? And that risk, when you give them that money of getting paid back, that's credit risk, right? I love to. I think finance is full of these like really fancy terms, right? And they're
Mhm.
overcomplicated, often for reasons that aren't really valid or good. So coming back to this problem, okay, how do you figure out how much money is safe to lend, right? Um, you bring in the concept of collateral, right? And collateral is your friend borrowing money from you and you like holding on to their phone or holding on to their bike, right? You're like, "Hey, like, I'll lend you this money, right? But I'm going to hold on to your bike, your skateboard, right? Like a few books you own, um, right? And when you pay me back, I'll give you back your things, right?" So they give you those items as collateral. Now, the question of how much they give you relative to how much they borrow, right? That's the collateralization ratio. That's where you start going, okay, is this an over collateralized loan or under collateralized loan? So really, this isn't like, we're not talking about two different things. We're talking about a spectrum of collateralization, and at some point, right, loans go from being under collateralized, where like those books, those skateboards are worth less than how much they've borrowed, right, to over collateralized, where those books, those skateboards are worth more than what they've borrowed. To us, the goal here is for this borrowing and lending experience to be as seamless as possible for users, all types of users, right? For lenders, for borrowers, uh, and the goal of any platform like marginfi is to safely understand the risks that borrowers should be taking on the platform to maintain what's called solvency, right? So that lenders keep getting paid back, um, and to understand where there should be constraints. So everything we've done, right, throughout our history has played along this spectrum, and it's a constant understanding of what's safe to do, and a constant tension between like we always want to build systems that provide users with more opportunity to borrow, right? I want you to have as much money in your pocket as possible, but there's a limit, and that limit is dependent on safety, and those two components, right, are competing forces that find a balance. Something maybe interesting for us to talk about is liquidity in Solana in general, liquidity in DeFi in general, because the way we see it, right, these are like the main factors that are really constraining like how much leverage protocols like marginfi can extend, and therefore like how good the experience of these products can be.
Yeah, that was I
And a
think a
wonderful
phenomenal
analogy
explanation.
too.
I totally agree with you. Yeah, yeah. Well, I totally agree with you that like the concepts underpinning finance, when you really break them down, are they tend to be fairly simple, and there are like sort of real world understandable analogies for them. A
Hmm.
lot of people don't realize this though, right? So I am far from an expert, but Edgar, I actually started my career at Goldman as well. I worked in a
Oh yeah.
private equity fund of funds at Goldman. So like I
Okay.
sometimes take for granted some of the terminology that I'm familiar with.
Yeah.
And I think part of the reason we wanted to ask some of these questions is to get the audience on the same page. One thing I want to note about like the collateralization piece is it's important regardless of where in finance you're working, to think about, but it's especially important on chain where we want things to be permissionless and automatic, right? It's like if you lend out something with the wrong level of collateralization, once that transaction has been executed, it's it's done, right? Like if that
Yep.
person gets liquidated, your own, and you were collateralized such that the liquidation is only going to pay back 60%. It's like, cool, well, you're screwed. That's
Hmm.
the end of it, right?
Yep.
So I just want to be like really clear there about why the over collateralization piece of marginfi is important to the safety of the people participating in the system. This is
Yeah.
not financial advice, but I will disclose that like I have tied up some soul
Yep,
with
as have
margin
I.
lend, and part of the thing that makes me comfortable with that is this over collateralization piece, right?
Mhm.
Is knowing that you've adequately managed the risk involved with what if this thing
Yeah,
doesn't get
it's
paid
super
back.
especially important in like the permissionless in the permissionless world that is blockchain, because like if you think of traditional finance, like there's legal recourse that a company or a lender can take depending on the type of borrow lend that actually happens. There's different recourse that can actually happen, but with blockchain and being permissionless, that recourse is almost nothing. So like the concept of being over having a borrow lend interaction being over collateralized, it makes it so it provides so much safety to the lender, which really is, I think, one of the things that I think is super great about marginfi is that you're providing this basically like low level safety for lenders to really help facilitate the entire interaction, which is phenomenal, and I love it.
Yeah, appreciate it, guys. I'll actually I'll actually go a step further than you on the safety spectrum and say that over collateralization is not enough. We don't think it's enough. Here's the problem with over collateralization, right? The idea of over collateralization is you always have enough tied up in the protocol that any borrowers can be paid back, right? So if a borrower takes that money, they disappear, they lose it, they just don't want to pay it back. They have collateral tied up, right? In the protocol that can be used to pay back their borrowers. Now, that sounds good. And I agree that it's a key safety component, but the big problem with it is that prices of these assets are generally constantly changing, right? And obviously, that's different depending on whether they're stable coins or whether they're volatile assets. But over collateralization on its own is just a mechanism to try to maintain more value in the protocol than is borrowed out, right? The key additional piece to the over collateralization is the liquidation mechanism behind the scenes, right? And I think this is, when you see lending protocols across blockchain, like we didn't build the first over collateralized lending protocol, to ever exist, like not by far, right? So, you have to ask, like, why have other over collateralized lending protocols blown up and lost lenders' funds? Like, how does that happen if over collateralization is supposed to solve the problem, right? And the answer is that they were over collateralized, right? They had these mechanisms that were supposed to keep the protocol safe. But behind the scenes, part of the automatic part of DeFi, the liquidators that were supposed to be taking bad debt off the platform, right? Paying back those loans that weren't getting paid back, they didn't move quickly enough. And because of that, the over collateralization didn't work. So, marginfi is over collateralized. We have an extremely powerful risk engine behind the scenes. And I think we have done about 1/100th of talking about it as I'd like to. We have a lot of content that we want to push. I'm constantly trying to get more out there. But we think it's a key component of understanding like why these platforms are safe and like where the safety really comes from, right? So that when users get to their next favorite lending protocol, whether it's marginfi or anyone else, anywhere else, right? They know the questions to ask, and so they can evaluate the risk for themselves.
Well, maybe I can maybe we can
Yeah.
tease that a little bit and come back to it in like an episode where we just talk about your sort of liquidation engine. But
Yeah.
because I do want to talk about some of like your product roadmap and what else you're building and what else you're moving toward. But I will say like I've read through your docs to get an idea of like how your liquidation engine is working. And for all the engineers who are listening to this, I just want to say like the the incentive management here is really really cool. It's very akin to like the incentives behind an Oracle network, where you're basically trying to say, hey, we need to create an incentive system that will make it so that people will participate in this network. They will get rewards for participating in this network. And as such, we trust the system broadly enough that we can rely on this Oracle data, right? And similarly, it's like your liquidation engine incentivizes people to be constantly monitoring whether or not something needs to be liquidated. And if they're the person who provides that liquidation, they get a reward. So there's an incentive to be staying on top of it and to do it quickly and make sure that we don't, you know, uh, lose out on being over collateralized because of a massive dip in prices without someone being on top of it and executing these liquidations. So anyway, that maybe that, and by the way, you can step in and correct anything I said there if it was not correct or too oversimplified. But I just wanted to give a quick teaser, so that we didn't just say, "Hey, this thing exists," and then blow right past it. But yeah,
No,
anything there you want to correct before we sort of move on to what's coming?
I think we're good there. If people have specific questions about anything on the risk side, anything on the liquidation side, I mean, look out for content. Just hop onto our Twitter at marginfi. All the channels. We're also trying to write more on our Substack, but B, like come and ask us questions and we can talk in depth about it. Yeah.
Cool. So what's
on the roadmap?
What's coming? Like what's next for you guys? What are you building and really excited about moving forward?
Yeah, I wanna focus on one thing first here. It's not necessarily a product, but it's something that we're using to something we're excited about regardless. It's essentially a points system. So you just talked about how one of the cool things in crypto is that everything's on chain. So you know the wallets that interact with you. You know what they do. You know the entire history of the wallet. It's anonymous. It's permissionless, which is amazing. But you can really quantify user actions and how they benefit or how they don't benefit your individual product. And so we will soon be coming out with, and like soon, like super soon, like being tested right now, could potentially be rolled out tonight if we wanted to. We just want to tweak the, make
probably
any
before this episode airs.
Yeah.
Talk about some alpha.
But yeah,
nice.
Yeah. Actually, we just dropped it. Yeah. Psych.
I'm deploying right now.
Yeah. But yeah, we're coming out with
I got to finish writing the code. So as soon as I'm done with meetings, we're
classic developer life.
Yeah. Yeah. But no, we will be able to quantify your contribution to marginfi. We're going to make that visible, and there will definitely be some like fun things tied up to the points you're accumulating. So we're super excited about dropping that. That's like one of the things I want to highlight. We are about to also unveil a much larger product expansion, thinking past just a borrow lend. And this is something really exciting. We're going to introduce some firsts for crypto once again, like we did with our prime brokerage product. I'll probably save that next bigger product, which we started working on, for like a proper announcement. But it is going to enable the user to do things that were not possible before in an ecosystem with a borrow lend. So this is like really exciting. Really good utilization of spot assets. But yeah, I want to focus on the points first of all. And one of the things with this point structure that we're going to outline soon, that we're going to drop soon, that everyone's going to be able to access is, there's a team on Ethereum that did this. That it's like one of the first teams to like do this in a more proper way. They're called Blur. They're a NFT exchange. They've done an excellent job. There's a team on Solana that's very comparable to them that's done also an excellent job, called Tensor. And with Blur, what happened is these points turned into essentially a marker for a following airdrop. And so a lot of users who accumulated points on the Blur exchange ended up getting Blur airdrop for their contributions, and that ignited like this frenzy of trading and activity and growth, both in like the Blur exchange and in the token holders, etc. And that was like something that's something that Ethereum I think is really good at, is that these teams can quickly like find a way to distribute like token to their community, because essentially these users are their company. Like if these users don't use their products are not valuable or not useful, right? And so they recognize that, and they reward users as such. This is something I think like Solana is really lacking. Uh, we have a lot of teams now finally that are very very talented, are hitting inflection points of the product. They're all pre-token. I'm talking about like Jito, Camino, Squads, Zeta, Cipher, Drift, etc. There's a ton I just missed right there. Um, I'm very excited to watch these teams hopefully pioneer something similar. I think this is something that's like really missing from Solana DeFi, because these governance tokens are essentially rewarding your strongest users. They're rewarding users that want to take initiative, direction within your protocol. They are a form of governance, so like users have a direct say into your product creation, ideation, roadmap, etc. And this is something like people get very very excited about. Like people were extremely excited when Uni dropped a token. When Sushi tried to vampire attack Uni, that was a huge drama. Compound token, Aave token, etc. Like all these blue chips that we know that have just aggregated these big moats, and like people trust them and use them, etc. Tokens were really like the fuel to the fire for that, for a lot of these teams. That's something that yeah, Solana I think is like finally poised to hit. Ethereum went through this, like for people that aren't familiar, it went through this stage where there was this time in 2017 where people were dropping these like really bad tokens, like predatory tokens, and it was like to vaporware products that no one used. And it was called this ICO hype in 2017. And like very like nothing essentially came out of that. It was like an experimentation phase on Ethereum. But then 2018 came around, and then that's when like a lot of these solid DeFi protocols that I previously mentioned started building and launching, and like accumulating users, and tokens shortly followed. I think the 2021, 2000, a little bit of 2022 was like that 2017 ICO hype cycle on Ethereum, on Solana. I think that's kind of like what happened, and so currently, people have the same sort of mind in many ways. Like past the Solana walls, people have the same sort of mindset about Solana that they do about Ethereum at that time in like early 2018, late 2017, where it's like, oh, it's all these tokens that aren't useful. These projects don't do anything. It's just a cash grab. I think we're finally hitting the 2018 era of Ethereum here in 2023 on Solana, where again the Jito, Camino, Drift, Cipher, Zeta, Squads, etc., marginfi are hitting that inflection point with their product. Like Jito a while back now surpassed like 20% of the network. Squads surpassed like 100 million in assets managed like months ago. Like these teams are hitting stride, and all of these teams again like don't have any sort of governance governance token associated with them yet, including us. And so that's something that I think is going to turn a lot of heads when that switch gets flipped on. That's something that we've been pushing like externally, we've been pushing internally. It's something I think the ecosystem needs. And when you connect that with a chain Solana, a blockchain Solana that has over 70% of its network staked to validators, which is equivalent to about like $6 billion US, um, and a lot of like very invested parties and interests, like invested in the long term here. I think that creates like a perfect storm where, you know, coming a change in this bull market that we're into, a bear market, coming a change in the low interest rates we see on chain to higher interest rates on chain, a change in like really solid teams without a token to now launching tokens. I think there's a lot of asymmetry there, and I think that's something a lot of teams should really think about and push on, because like now is the time to make that switch. So that's like my sort of extended caveat to the point structure that we're about to launch, is that I hope it's not just us, and I don't think it is going to just be us. And there's a lot of teams we're kind of positioned around that we're excited about.
So it sounds like you feel very strongly that uh, these protocols and companies need to create tokens. And I definitely can see what you're saying about like rewarding your users, giving them some say in product direction through tokenization. I think that is a huge benefit. I want to ask a question that kind of relates to something Edgar mentioned early in the call, which was like, you know, everything in finance is kind of about like, can we get this benefit while mitigating the risk? Like there's both an upside and a downside always, and we obviously want to find a way to asymmetrically limit risk while maintaining the upside. I feel like the risk of everybody producing tokens is something you actually just said, right? Which is like just a bunch of shit coins that like,
Yeah,
maybe don't have the weight behind them to actually benefit people.
yeah,
And not everyone is sophisticated enough to know the difference and to sort of steer clear of things that are not helpful,
yeah.
and while simultaneously like effectively utilizing tokens that are out there. I'm curious if you have any ideas for like a system to help people navigate that, or if it really just comes down to people like learning more and doing their
Yeah,
research,
yeah,
that kind of thing, right?
yeah. Well, I think like quickly first, um, a lot of teams need to like a token is a necessity, not some sort of benefit. Especially like when you dip into the realm of like DeFi, which is like decentralized finance, permissionless finance, which is like this community governed financial primitive. Uh, there needs to be an instrument for the community to govern it with, right? And so that's super, super essential. Like these aren't just like nice to haves; they're kind of need to haves. And what teams have been doing is getting to that point, because any sort of project needs to be kickstarted. Um, but like the second part of your question, I mean, uh, one, like you got to be in the arena, like you got to know anytime you interact with marginfi, like I want you to know what you're interacting with. I want you to know like what you're doing, and if you don't, hit our Telegram, or ask us some questions, and we'll answer that. And I'm sure all the teams I mentioned will do that as well. So come in informed. um, but like zooming out, like that's finance in general, right? Like you're not going to come into the stock market and know exactly what's going to happen a week from now with Apple stock or Tesla stock, etc. Um, and governance tokens are very much different than that, in the sense that they're again these like decentralized tools to govern a product. They're not these. They don't embody a lot of the things that you see across like the traditional finance space. So like coming in with that evolved mindset, I think that'd be like my quick answer. I'm interested if Edgar has anything there as well.
Totally agree. Yeah, I think uh, that's a good like stopping point, more or less. I totally agree that uh, it's like from a user perspective, it's almost like the default when coming to a new protocol is like, I don't trust this, and it's on the builders to sort of flip that default, I don't trust this, to I do trust this, right? And for what it's worth, I feel like Margin has done a great job at that. I already mentioned that earlier. It's like I'm there with you guys. there's a ton more I'd love to talk to you guys about. If we can have you guys on again some other time, and maybe we can have some like very targeted discussions about specific things. Like, Edgar, you just were bringing up sort of you mentioned democratizing passive wealth, and it's like, oh man, yeah, maybe we need an episode where we just talk about the why behind DeFi, right? Like where it's like we're not even talking about specific products. We're just talking about why does DeFi matter and why should people care, because sort of almost like level setting for audiences here, so that we all know what we're talking about before we talk specifics. But if I'm being honest, DeFi is what got me excited about blockchain, right? The sorts of products that you guys are building are the things that sort of made me realize that blockchain isn't just a fun technology that's like fun to explore, but it actually has really meaningful use cases that can really change lives and global systems, right? So thanks to both of you for what you guys are working on and building. I am really excited to see the new products that you come out with. I love your mindset around like, we want to solve problems that exist right now. We're not just like only working toward the thing that 5 years from now, right? It's like, we want to solve a problem today. I think that's super awesome.
Yeah, I agree with all that. Yeah.
Thanks for having us on.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks
Awesome,
a lot for coming.
guys. Well, it was great to meet you both. Any last minute, shills you want to make before we sign off?
Just watch out for marginfi points dropping very soon.
Soon, TM.
Awesome.
So very much stay tuned there. Yeah. Like,
I'm excited for it. Very hands-on. Love it. Well, cool. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it again. To all the listeners, we'll see you guys next week.